Everything started when Sarah moved into the Pine Hollow neighborhood in Washington State, 3 houses down from me across the street. I'm Ethan Brooks, 37, a software engineer living in the small house I bought a few years ago. Pine Hollow is the kind of quiet suburban area where people get along, and hardly anyone stirs up trouble, at least not until Sarah showed up. From day one, everyone knew she was a menace. Within her first week, she reported 3 neighbors to the HOA for petty reasons. Bill for leaving his trash cans visible from the street, Jen for keeping a basketball hoop that'd been there for a decade, with no complaints, and Martha for hanging wind chimes that were too loud, by her self-appointed standards. I heard about it from Nora Kim, my chatty neighbor who talks to me while watering her plants, and I just thought, yeah, probably just someone who likes to overreact. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the latest video. I'm different. I don't stand out in the neighborhood, and I like it that way. The only thing I really care about is my backyard garden, my pride and joy. It's not some magazine-worthy masterpiece, but to me it's everything. I've got beds of violets blooming year-round, a few dwarf pear trees that bear sweet fruit every fall, and an automatic irrigation system I rigged up myself. I keep it clean and tidy, not because I'm scared of dumb HOA rules, but because I love stepping out back, smelling the flowers, and hearing the water trickle. It's where I unwind after long days of coding, something I built from a bare patch of dirt into my own little slice of nature. Sarah arrived with an over-the-top confidence, glossy dyed blonde hair, a shrill voice that carried across the street whenever she called someone out to talk. I saw her moving truck parked in front of the old Thompson house, and at first I figured I'd go say hi like a decent neighbor. But after hearing Nora's stories about her reports, I decided to keep my distance. I told myself, let her settle in first. I don't need to get caught up in drama. And for the first few months I succeeded. Sarah didn't seem to notice me. I kept my garden in perfect shape. Flowers trimmed, pear trees not encroaching, so she had no reason to target me. Or so I thought. Then one morning while I was on a Zoom call with a client, I heard an odd noise from the backyard. Not birds chirping or wind rustling leaves, but metal scraping dirt, mixed with irritated muttering. I tried to ignore it, focusing on my screen, but the sound grew louder, like someone was digging right in my yard. I apologized to the client, muted my mic, and stepped outside to see what was happening. What I saw froze me in my tracks. Sarah, shovel in hand, standing in the middle of my violet bed, sweating as she dug up the soil. She wore a bright tracksuit jacket, and looked at me with zero shame when I caught her red-handed. "Good morning," she said, her fake sweet tone barely hiding her bad intentions. "I'm taking care of this garden." She pointed at my pear tree like it was a pile of trash, instead of something I'd nurtured for years. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm in the face of this absurdity. "Taking care of what?" I asked, my voice trembling with anger. She smiled, that kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes, and said, "Your tree's flooding my property. I measured it. It violates HOA rules." I stood there in my Pine Hollow backyard, watching Sarah tear up my violet bed, like she was hunting for treasure. The shovel in her hands plunged deep into the soil, uprooting the flowers I'd painstakingly planted over 2 springs. I was still in shock, my mind reeling to make sense of it. Just a minute ago, I'd been talking to a client about software bugs. Now I was facing a blonde woman in a tracksuit wrecking my garden, without hesitation. "Sarah," I called, keeping my voice steady despite my pounding heart. "What are you doing on my property?" Sarah stopped digging, leaned on the shovel like a warrior after a victory, and gave me that fake smile I was starting to hate. "Good morning again," she said, her voice so sickly sweet, it made me cringe. "I'm dealing with this garden issue. Your pear tree floods my yard every time it rains, and I'm done with it." She pointed at the pear tree, the one barely 6 feet tall that I'd grown from a tiny cutting, like it was the culprit behind a neighborhood deluge. I blinked, trying to find logic in her words. Her house was 3 doors down, across the street. How could my pear tree's roots flood anything? "Garden issue?" I repeated, stepping closer, still clutching my phone from when I'd rushed out of the Zoom call. "This is my garden on my land, and you're trespassing. What gives you the right to dig here?" Sarah laughed, a snide chuckle like I'd just told a lame joke. "Don't be so naive," she said, shaking her head. "Per HOA Rule 47.8, trees posing a flooding risk are banned in Pine Hollow. That pear tree's at least 6 feet tall. I measured it. It has to go, and since you won't do it, I'm handling it." She shrugged, then drove the shovel back into the dirt, tearing up another patch of violets. I took a deep breath, trying not to yell. "Rule 47.8, I asked, my voice rising with frustration. "I've read the HOA rules cover to cover. There's no such thing, and even if there were, you don't have the right to come in here and destroy my property." You're not the police or the HOA. Sarah paused for a second, her eyes flickering with doubt, but then that smile returned, twice as confident. I'm the new HOA president, she declared, chin held high. The election was last week. You'd know if you bothered to show up to the meeting. I froze. HOA president. I knew Oliver Grant had been president for 3 years, and he'd never mentioned an election. But Sarah said it with such certainty that I briefly doubted myself. Still, I snapped back to reality. Whether you're president or not, I said, stepping closer, you still can't just come onto my land and dig up whatever you want. This is trespassing. It's illegal. I'm asking you to leave now, or I'll call the police. Sarah put a hand to her chest, feigning shock like I'd insulted her. The police? For me protecting community standards? Don't overreact. This garden's a hazard, tree roots ruining the sidewalk, irrigation water spilling onto my property every week. I've already started digging, so let me finish. She lifted the shovel again, like my words meant nothing. I stepped back, pulling out my phone. This is your last chance to leave on your own, I said, my voice firmer. I'm not kidding. Something in my tone, maybe the rare seriousness, made Sarah pause. She looked at me, then set the shovel down, but not out of fear. Fine, she said, smirking, but you'll get an official HOA violation notice, with a fine. This isn't over. She slung the shovel over her shoulder and strutted off, her blonde hair swaying with every arrogant step. I stood there, staring at my ruined violet bed, feeling a mix of anger and helplessness. When Sarah was out of sight, I went back inside, my mind a mess. I knew I had to do something, not just to protect my garden but to deal with this self-proclaimed HOA president. I texted my friend Ryan Carter, a real estate lawyer, giving him a quick rundown of what happened. She's nuts, I typed, attaching a photo of the dug-up flower bed. Ryan replied instantly, take more evidence, set up cameras, and call the police if she comes back. Don't let her run wild. I nodded at the screen. I'll check Pine Hollow's HOA rules, but I'd bet $100 she's making it up. I nodded, though he couldn't see me, and my anger started turning into resolve. Thanks, Ryan. I'll handle it. I hung up, grabbed my laptop, and opened the HOA rules PDF I'd downloaded last year. I skimmed through. No Rule 47.8, nothing about flood-causing trees. Sarah was flat out lying. Before I could process it, I heard noise from the backyard again. My heart pounded. She can't be back that fast, can she? I muttered, rushing to the window. Sure enough, Sarah was there, shovel in hand, digging in the same spot like I'd never told her to leave. Her face was red, sweat dripping, but she still had that smug confidence. I flung open the door and shouted, I told you to get out of here. What are you doing? She looked up, shameless. I told you, Ethan. I'm getting rid of this tree. You won't cooperate, so I'm doing it. It's HOA business. I stepped into the yard, phone already dialed to 911, but not yet connected. There's no rule like you're claiming, I snapped. I checked. You're not the HOA president, and even if you were, you can't destroy someone else's property. Leave now, or I'm really calling the police. Sarah smirked, stabbing the shovel into the ground again. Go ahead. I'm not scared. I'm protecting the neighborhood from your messy garden. See who's right. That was the last straw. I hit call, speaking quickly to dispatch. I need police at Pine Hollow now. Someone's trespassing on my property and destroying it. While waiting for the cops, I stood between Sarah and the pear tree, filming with my phone. You're being recorded, I said. Everything you do is evidence. Sarah shrugged, but I saw a flicker of worry in her eyes. You're pathetic, she said, her voice shrill, threatening me with police just for doing what's right. Wait for the fine notice. You'll regret this. She kept digging, slower now, like she was daring me to escalate. About 20 minutes later, a police car pulled up in front of my house. 2 officers stepped out. Perez, a tall guy with a stern face, and Lynn, a petite woman with sharp eyes. I explained briefly. She came onto my yard, started digging, claims it's for an HOA rule, but I checked. It's not real. Perez glanced at the wrecked flower bed, then turned to Sarah. Miss Sarah, what are you doing on Mr. Brooks' property? Sarah set the shovel down, wiped sweat off her face, and answered confidently. I'm the HOA president, enforcing rules. His tree causes flooding. I have the right to handle it. Lynn frowned. Do you have paperwork proving that authority and permission to be here? Sarah hesitated for a second, then said, I don't need paperwork. I'm doing it for the community. Perez shook his head. If Mr. Brooks didn't allow it, this is trespassing. You need to leave now, or we'll have to arrest you. Sarah glared at me, but finally grabbed her shovel and left, not before saying, "This isn't over, Ethan." When she was gone, Perez turned to me. "She might come back. Get cameras and keep evidence. If it gets worse, call us right away." I nodded, feeling both relieved and tense. After Officers Perez and Lynn left, I stood in my Pine Hollow backyard, staring at the ruined violet bed and my pear tree. Buddy's still standing, for now. Sarah had been chased off, but her threat, "This isn't over," echoed in my head. I knew her type wouldn't quit easily, especially after being humiliated in front of the police. I went inside, checked the video I'd recorded. Sarah digging, her shrill voice blaring through the phone speaker. "Good," I told myself. Evidence secured. I sent it to Ryan Carter with a message. "Police made her leave, but I bet she won't stop." I didn't have to wait long to be proven right. That afternoon, as I finished brewing coffee and sat on the couch to decompress from the crazy day, I heard footsteps outside. I peeked out the window. No one there. But when I checked the mailbox, a thick white envelope sat inside. I opened it, and what I saw nearly made me spill my coffee. An HOA violation notice, printed on professional-looking paper with a bold red header and Sarah's sloppy signature as Pine Hollow HOA president. It demanded I remove the flood risk pear tree within 48 hours, or face a $500 fine, plus $100 daily until the violation is resolved. Her signature was so big, it took up half the bottom of the page, like it was screaming, "I'm still in charge." I laughed, a mix of irritation and disbelief. "Is she serious with this?" I muttered, rereading every line. Rule 47.8 was mentioned again, but I'd already confirmed it didn't exist. I snapped a photo, sent it to Ryan, and called him. "She sent a fake fine notice," I said when he picked up. $500 plus $100 a day. What do I do with this? Ryan sighed over the phone. "Ethan, this is petty retaliation. Don't pay a dime. Send me a copy, and contact the real HOA president. If she has no authority, it's worthless." I followed Ryan's advice. I dug up Oliver Grant's number, the HOA president I'd met a few times at neighborhood meetings. Oliver's a quiet accountant type, never one for drama. I emailed him, attaching the photo of Sarah's letter, and explained briefly. "Sarah claims she's HOA president, dug up my garden today, and now sent this. I need to confirm if she has authority." While waiting for a reply, I ordered a cheap security camera set online, good enough for 24/7 recording. Perez was right. I needed to be ready for Sarah's next move. Less than 2 hours later, Oliver called back. "Ethan, I just saw your email," he said, sounding mildly surprised. "Sarah's not the HOA president. I am, have been for 3 years. We had a meeting last week, but no election. She only volunteered for the landscaping committee. That's it." I exhaled, relieved, but asked, "So this fine notice, what's that about?" "She made it all up." Oliver chuckled dryly. "Absolutely. No vote on trees or flooding ever happened. I don't know where she got that paper, but it's not valid. I'll call an emergency HOA meeting to deal with this. Don't worry." I hung up, feeling both relieved and annoyed. Relieved that Sarah didn't actually hold power, but annoyed she had the gall to send a fake notice hours after the police kicked her out. I texted Nora, giving her the rundown, and she replied instantly. "She's nuts. You should post this on Reddit. Entitled, People Would Love It." I laughed, thinking it wasn't a bad idea. After Sarah's fake fine notice, living in Pine Hollow started feeling like a dark comedy. Oliver Grant confirmed she wasn't HOA president, and I'd just ordered security cameras to catch her next shovel-wielding stunt, or whatever crazy idea she'd cook up. I thought things would settle until the emergency HOA meeting. But Mother Nature had other plans. A sudden spring storm hit the neighborhood, bringing torrential rain and gusty winds strong enough to rattle my windows. I sat in the living room, listening to the rain pound the roof, telling myself, as long as my garden survives this, I'm good. As dusk fell, I checked the backyard. Rain poured down, but my irrigation system held up. I designed it to drain well, avoiding floods. But I noticed the spot Sarah had dug the day before. An uneven patch near Buddy the pear tree now looked like a small water-filled pit. I muttered, "She screwed up the natural flow." I'm no hydrologist, but I knew that hole could spell trouble if the rain kept up. I snapped some photos and sent them to Ryan Carter with the caption, "Check this out, Sarah's aftermath." Ryan replied fast, "Keep the evidence. It could help if she tries to sue you." By midnight the wind picked up, and I heard branches snapping somewhere in the neighborhood. I couldn't sleep, partly from worrying about the garden, partly from an uneasy feeling about Sarah. The next morning, the rain hadn't let up, and I decided to check outside. I threw on a raincoat, grabbed an umbrella, and stepped into the front yard. Everything looked fine. The pear tree stood firm. The violets were soaked but intact. I sighed in relief, thinking I'd overreacted, but then I heard a shrill scream in the distance, and my stomach sank. Not her again, is it? I wondered, stepping onto the street to get a better look. 3 houses down, a small crowd gathered in front of Sarah's place. I saw emergency vehicle lights flashing, and as I got closer, I couldn't believe my eyes. Sarah's basement was flooded, deep enough that furniture floated like it was in a rundown pool. Rainwater poured through the basement windows, streaming from her front yard onto the street. Sarah stood on the lawn, drenched like a drowned rat, yelling at a responder. "Do something, my house is flooded. This is a $500,000 property." I blended into the crowd, trying not to laugh out loud. Nora, my gardening neighbor, sidled up, and whispered, "She deserves it." Word as the water started pouring in last night. I glanced around, spotting other neighbors, Bill, Jen, watching with a mix of pity and satisfaction. "What happened?" I asked Nora. She shrugged. "No one's sure, but someone said the spot she dug in your yard sent water flowing back this way. Karma's quick." I frowned, picturing the pit Sarah left. I'm not an engineer, but if she messed up the natural drainage, the rainwater might have pooled toward the lower ground. Her house instead of the storm drain like usual. Before I could ask more, a city truck pulled up. A middle-aged man stepped out, holding a clipboard, and introduced himself as Leo Hayes, an environmental inspector. He walked around Sarah's house, jotting something down, then came over to talk to me, when he saw me standing nearby. "You're Ethan Brooks, the guy whose garden got dug up the other day?" he asked. I nodded, a bit surprised. "Yeah, how'd you know?" Leo pointed toward Sarah's house. "Officer Perez filled me in on the incident. I've been checking the drainage system in this area, and the spot she dug shifted the water flow. It was supposed to drain to the main road, but now it's all pooling into her basement." I blinked, processing the info. "You mean, because she dug up my garden, her house flooded?" Leo nodded, his face serious, but with a slight twitch at the corner of his mouth. "Exactly. She shot herself in the foot. I'll file an official report. You can use it if there's a lawsuit." I stood there, half stunned, half amused. Sarah, in her quest to wreck my garden, had accidentally turned her own basement into a lake. I glanced over at her, now stomping around, yelling into her phone, and couldn't help but think, is this fate? The crowd started to disperse as the responders pumped out the water, but Sarah suddenly spotted me. Her eyes narrowed, and she charged across the soggy lawn, pointing in my face. "This is your fault," she screamed, her voice overpowering the rain. "You did something to the drainage to get back at me." "I know it." I stepped back, hands up. "Your house is 3 doors down, across the street. I didn't touch anything. You dug that hole in my garden, and now the water's flowing back here. That's on you." She glared, but couldn't argue back, just turned away, muttering something about lawyers and suing. When I got home, Nora texted, "See, don't mess with people like Sarah. They'll ruin themselves." I laughed, sank onto the couch, and looked out at my still safe garden through the window. The storm in Pine Hollow had passed, leaving streets littered with broken branches and puddles, but the drama with Sarah was just heating up. After her basement turned into a mini lake because of the hole she dug in my garden, I figured she'd lay low for a while, at least to clean up her own mess, but I'd underestimated the stubbornness of a true Sarah. That afternoon, as I sat in the kitchen sipping coffee and checking my newly installed security cameras, Sarah showed up at my door, soaked head to toe, hands on hips, eyes blazing like she wanted to devour me. "Ethan Brooks, you think you're so smart, huh?" she yelled, her shrill voice drowning out the post-rain birdsong. I opened the door, keeping a safe distance, and said, "I don't know what you're talking about. I've been home all day." She jabbed a finger at me, water dripping from her sleeve onto my porch. "Don't play dumb. You messed with the drainage to get revenge. My basement's flooded, my stuff's ruined, and I know you're behind it." I blinked, trying not to laugh at her warped logic. "Your house is 3 doors down, across the street. I didn't touch a thing." Inspector Leo Hayes explained it. "You dug up my garden, shifted the water, and now it's flowing back to you. That's your doing." Sarah glared, her face flushed red. "Leo Hayes, that city guy? You bribed him to blame me." "I know it. You're jealous I'm the HOA president, so you set this up." I shook my head, incredulous she was still clinging to that president title. "Sarah, Oliver Grant's the president. You're not. You dug your own hole, literally, and figuratively. Go home. I'm done arguing." But Sarah wouldn't leave. She stomped her foot, shouting, "You'll pay for this. I'll sue you for ruining my property." Then she stormed off, muttering about lawyers and compensation, leaving a wet trail on my walkway. I shut the door and texted Nora. She just came over blaming me for her flooded basement. For real? Nora replied. You kidding? She's nuts. The whole neighborhood saw water pouring out of her house. Don't worry. No one believes her. I sighed in relief, but the unease lingered. Sarah wasn't the type to give up, and I had a feeling she wouldn't stop at yelling in my face. I checked the cameras again, all quiet, then went to bed, hoping tomorrow would be calmer. But I was wrong. At 2 a.m., I jolted awake to a strange noise from the backyard. I sprang up, peered out the window, and saw a familiar figure under the streetlight. Sarah, in a raincoat, holding a bottle, creeping near my pear tree. Buddy, I pulled up the camera app on my phone, and there she was, clear as day, pouring something from the bottle onto the tree's base. Herbicide, I muttered, heart pounding. She wasn't just digging up my garden anymore. She wanted to kill my tree for revenge. I called 911 immediately, whispering to dispatch. Someone's trespassing in my backyard, damaging my trees. Send police to Pine Hollow now. While waiting, I filmed through the window, capturing every move Sarah made. She worked fast, emptying the bottle and starting to leave. But before she could, the police car rolled up. Officers Perez and Lynn stepped out, flashlights pinning Sarah in place. Miss Sarah, what are you doing here again? Perez asked, his voice thick with exhaustion. Sarah flinched, dropping the bottle, and stammered. I was just checking the tree. It's flooding my house. I have the right. Lynn picked up the bottle, sniffed it, and frowned. This is herbicide. Were you trying to kill Mr. Brooks's tree? Sarah glared. I'm the HOA president. I can protect the neighborhood. Perez shook his head. You're not the president. We confirmed that with Mr. Grant. This is your second trespassing offense, plus vandalism. You're coming with us to the station. Sarah thrashed, but they led her away, not before she shot me a hateful glance through the window. After they left, I called Nora. She just poured herbicide on my tree. Police got her. Nora laughed over the phone. God, doesn't she learn from the basement? You've got to post this on Reddit. The next morning, I checked the pear tree. Luckily, the rain had washed away most of the herbicide, and Buddy was fine, but I knew Sarah wouldn't stop, even after being caught. After officers Perez and Lynn hauled Sarah away from my Pine Hollow backyard at 2 a.m., I stood in the kitchen, staring out the window with a mix of relief and tension. The herbicide bottle she dropped still lay there, rolling on the wet grass, a silent testament to her madness. I reviewed the security footage. Sarah sneaking around, pouring the liquid on Buddy, crystal clear and undeniable. I sent it to Ryan Carter with a message. She came back with herbicide. Police nabbed her. What now? Ryan replied instantly. Perfect. Keep that video. I'll swing by this morning to see if we can file a suit. The next morning, I checked the pear tree. Thankfully, the storm's heavy rain had rinsed off most of the herbicide before it could sink in, and Buddy stood tall though a few lower leaves were yellowing. I exhaled, relieved, but knew the Sarah saga wasn't over. Perez called while I was eating breakfast, his voice tinged with fatigue. We talked to Miss Sarah at the station. He said, she insists she's the HOA president, with a right to protect the neighborhood. But we double-checked with Oliver Grant. She has no authority. This is her second trespassing, plus vandalism. We issued an official warning, but if you want to press charges, you've got plenty of evidence. I nodded over the phone. Thanks, Perez. I'll talk to my lawyer. Is she still in custody? Perez sighed. No, we released her after booking, but if she comes back again, we'll arrest her on the spot. Keep those cameras rolling. I hung up, reassured the police were on my side, but wary Sarah would cook up another retaliation. She wasn't the type to quit. The flooded basement and last night's arrest probably just made her angrier. Ryan showed up at 10, coffee in hand, and a determined look. He watched the video, nodding. This is gold, he said. Trespassing, intentional vandalism, plus statements from the police and Inspector Leo Hayes about the basement flood. You can sue civilly, claim damages for the garden, pear tree, violets, everything. If she doesn't pay, I'll take it to court. I shrugged. I don't want a long fight, but she won't leave me alone. Go for it. Ryan grinned. Done. I'll draft the papers. You just sign. That afternoon, Oliver Grant called back. I just held an emergency HOA meeting, he said, voice firm. We heard about Sarah digging up your garden and claiming to be president. She has no authority. That fine notice was completely fake. We've officially removed her from the landscaping committee, and the violations voided. I'm sorry this got so out of hand. I thanked Oliver, finally feeling supported. Thanks. But she came back last night, dumped herbicide on my tree. Police handled it. I'm suing her. Oliver sighed. Good grief. Can't she stop? Don't worry. The HOA's behind you. I thought things might calm down, but then another surprise hit. That evening the doorbell rang, and I found a middle-aged man on my porch. Salt and pepper hair, gray blazer, looking sheepish. I'm David, he said, offering a handshake. Sarah's ex-husband. I heard about this from our daughter, and I'm sorry for what she's done. I blinked, unsure how to respond. Thanks. But why are you here? David sighed. Sarah's been unhinged since our divorce 3 years ago. I'm not excusing her, but I want to make it right. I'll pay to fix your garden, flowers, trees, whatever's damaged to avoid more lawsuits. She's broke, but I don't want you out of pocket. I mulled it over. That's generous, David. But she got caught last night, vandalizing again. I'm still suing, payment or not. David nodded. I get it. Sue her anyway. I just want to do right by you. Send me the garden repair bill. I'll cover it. He left handing me his card, and I stood there, feeling like I'd gotten an unexpected gift in this nightmare. I texted Nora. Sarah's ex just offered to pay for the garden. Still suing though. Nora replied. What a plot twist. Posted on Reddit. Ethan. I laughed, thinking it might be time to share this saga with the world. After Sarah's ex David left my Pine Hollow home with his offer to cover the garden damage, I figured I could finally relax a bit. The police had warned Sarah. The HOA had stripped her of any role, and Ryan Carter was drafting a civil suit. Things seemed to be falling into place. I even checked on Buddy the pear tree and the violets out back. They were holding up despite Sarah's attacks. I texted Nora Kim. Sarah's ex is paying for the garden. I might win this without a fight. Nora shot back. Don't celebrate yet. She's not done. I chuckled, thinking she was overreacting. But Nora was right. 5 days later, I woke up at 2 a.m. to an odd noise from the backyard. Not rain or wind, but metal scraping dirt, just like the first time Sarah dug up my garden. My heart raced. No way, I muttered, leaping out of bed and rushing to the window. Under the dim streetlight, there she was, Sarah, in a black raincoat, shovel in hand, frantically digging around Buddy the pear tree. I opened the camera app on my phone, and the footage was crystal clear. She wasn't just digging, she was trying to uproot the whole tree, roots sticking out jaggedly. She's lost it, I whispered, equal parts furious and shocked. I didn't hesitate, calling 911 immediately. Someone's trespassing in my backyard in Pine Hollow. I told dispatch, voice shaking with anger. She's wrecking my tree for the 3rd time. Send police now. While waiting, I filmed through the window, catching every shovel strike. Sarah worked like a woman possessed, muttering something I couldn't make out. But I'd bet it was her usual HOA and flooding nonsense. I wanted to storm out and yell at her, but I remembered Ryan's advice. Don't handle it yourself, let the law do it. I gritted my teeth, stayed put, and gripped my phone. Less than 15 minutes later, police lights flashed outside. Officers Perez and Len stepped out, flashlights locking onto Sarah. She flinched, dropping the shovel, but didn't run. Miss Sarah, what are you doing here again? Perez asked, his tone dripping with exasperation. Sarah stood tall, brushing dirt off her hands, and replied with bizarre confidence. I'm fixing the drainage issue. This tree floods my house. I have the right to remove it. Lynn frowned, eyeing the half-uprooted pear tree. You were warned. This is Mr. Brooks' property. You have no rights here. Sarah glared. I'm the HOA president. I have full authority. Perez shook his head. You're not the president. We've confirmed that. This is your 3rd trespassing offense, plus serious vandalism. You're coming with us now. Sarah flailed, screaming. You can't arrest me. I'll sue you all. But Lynn swiftly cuffed her, leading her to the car as she kept yelling. I stepped outside and told Perez. Thanks guys. She's ruined my tree. Perez nodded. We saw it all. She's not getting out of this one. The next morning, I called Nora over to see the damage. Buddy, the pear tree was dug up deep, nearly half its roots severed, leaves drooping pitifully. I called Leo Hayes, the city inspector, to check it out. Leo arrived at 10, inspected the tree, and shook his head. This tree's toast, he said. Too many roots cut, it won't survive. Worth about $3,000, enough for a serious vandalism charge. I'll write a report for you. I nodded, feeling both sad and furious. Buddy was part of my garden, my home, and Sarah had destroyed it over her stupid ego. Perez called at noon. Miss Sarah's in custody, he said. With the camera footage, our statements, and Leo's report, She's facing criminal charges, trespassing and intentional vandalism. The DA's reviewing it, but she's not slipping away this time. I exhaled, relieved. Thanks, Perez. Did she say anything? He gave a dry laugh. She's still insisting she's the HOA president, but no one's buying it anymore. Relax, we've got this. I texted Ryan. Sarah got caught. The pear tree's badly damaged. Can we sue? Ryan replied. Perfect. With $3,000 in damages, I'll ramp up the civil suit. She's done for. I sank onto the couch, gazing out at the yard through the window. Buddy was beyond saving, but Sarah was finally paying the price. Nora came over that afternoon, with a tray of cookies. You won, she said, laughing heartily. She dug her own grave this time. For real. I nodded. After Sarah's final arrest for tearing up my pear tree, Buddy in my backyard, I stood looking at the poor tree with mixed feelings. Nearly half its roots were severed, leaves drooping like it was about to give up the ghost. Leo Hayes was right, it couldn't be saved. But with Perez confirming Sarah was in custody, and Ryan promising to push the civil suit, I started seeing light at the end of the tunnel. I texted Nora Kim. The pear tree's toast, but so is Sarah. I won. Nora shot back. Good, now fix the garden. I'll help. The next day I contacted my home insurance company. I sent photos of the wrecked pear tree, Leo's report, and the camera footage. The rep listened, then agreed to cover $3,000 for a replacement tree, plus cleanup costs for the violet bed Sarah had dug up earlier. You're lucky you've got clear evidence, he said over the phone. I smirked. Lucky wasn't the word for dealing with a lunatic like Sarah, but at least I wasn't out of pocket. Sarah's ex-husband, David, kept his word too, sending me a $1,000 check with a note for the garden repairs. Sorry again. I held the check, thinking this might be the weirdest plot twist of the whole saga. With the insurance money and David's contribution, I decided not just to replace the pear tree, but to revamp the whole garden. I called Nora, and she showed up with a wild idea. Why not throw a planting party and invite the neighborhood? Call it a Sarah Gone celebration. I laughed. You serious? Would people actually come? Nora shrugged. Haven't you noticed? All of Pine Hollow hates Sarah. They'll show up for you. And for the schadenfreude. I agreed, and Nora turned into a whirlwind, texting neighbors, planning, even making a sign. The anti-Sarah garden. That weekend, my backyard was buzzing like a festival. Nora brought a new pear tree, slightly taller than Buddy, with strong roots, plus some violet clumps to replace the ruined ones. Bill, the guy Sarah reported for his trash cans, brought a tray of brownies. Jen, the basketball hoop victim, chipped in with small flower pots to spruce it up. Even 80-year-old Martha, of wind chime fame, shuffled over, pressing a bag of seeds into my hand, and saying, "Plant these, make Sarah mad." I stood amid the crowd, touched and amused. Who knew a garden could bring a neighborhood together like this? We planted the new pear tree together. I named it Survivor to commemorate, and fixed the violet bed. Nora directed everyone like a movie director, while I dug, spread fertilizer, and laughed until my sides hurt, as Bill recounted how Sarah once tried measuring his trash cans with a tape measure. When we finished, the backyard didn't just recover, it looked better than ever. The new pear tree stood sturdy, violets glowed, and I added a small veggie patch to thank everyone. Nora hung a little wooden sign near the tree, engraved with the anti-Sarah garden, Pine Hollow United. The group cheered, raised glasses of lemonade, and for the first time in all this drama, I felt at peace. That night, I sat down, opened my laptop, and posted the whole story to Reddit's Entitled People subreddit. I detailed everything, from Sarah moving in, digging up my garden, flooding her own basement, to the herbicide incident, and her final arrest. I included photos, the trashed flower bed, the ruined pear tree, and the new garden with the anti-Sarah garden sign. The title, HOA Sarah Digs Up My Garden Without Permission, floods her basement instead. Within an hour, it racked up hundreds of upvotes, comments flooding in. Peak Sarah, karma's fast. You should sell tickets to this garden. I laughed hard, texting Nora, "I'm famous on Reddit now." She replied, "Good, you're the neighborhood hero too." A few days later Ryan called. "Ethan, good news," he said. "Sarah took a plea deal, fines, community service, and a ban from Pine Hollow. She's selling her house to pay the penalties, and $3,000 to you for the pear tree. I'll send the papers to sign." I exhaled. "Thanks, Ryan. So it's really over?" He chuckled. "Yeah, unless she's dumb enough to come back." I looked out at the garden through the window. Survivor standing strong in the afternoon sun, and knew Sarah had no shot left. The next week, I saw a for sale sign in front of Sarah's house. She left without a word, abandoning the empty place with its still dank basement. Nora said, "It's like the neighborhood got a cleanse." I nodded. Sarah finally left Pine Hollow, leaving behind an empty house with a sold sign, and a basement still reeking of mildew that I'm sure the neighborhood will never forget. I sat in my armchair in the living room, gazing out at the garden through the window. Survivor the pear tree stood firm. The violets blazed, and Nora's Auntie Sarah garden sign tilted slightly in the afternoon sun. After all the drama, from Sarah's first shovel strike to her final arrest, I never imagined my little garden would become a symbol of something bigger. Community strength. Nora was right. Sarah dug her own grave, but that hole ended up pulling Pine Hollow together. Bill now stops by to check on the pear tree. Jen suggested a neighborhood BBQ, and Martha mailed me more seeds with a note. For next season, don't let Sarah win. My Reddit post soared past 5,000 upvotes, with hundreds of comments praising peak karma and saying you should write a book. I laughed hard, thinking I'd accidentally become a local hero just for refusing to let a Sarah ruin my garden. Looking back, I realized Sarah didn't just lose to me. She lost to the whole neighborhood. She arrived with a massive ego, and a need to control everything, only to leave behind a flooded basement, and a pile of legal trouble. I kept my garden, not just with cameras or lawyers, but with neighbors I used to only nod to in passing. I texted Nora, "You were right. No one beats a united Pine Hollow." She replied, "Told you. Now rest, hero." I stood up, went to the backyard, and brushed Survivor's leaves. Sarah tried to destroy what I loved, but she accidentally forged a stronger community. I smirked, thinking maybe I should add another sign. "Thanks, Sarah, for bringing us together." The story HOA Sarah digs up my garden without permission, floods her basement instead, reflects a very real slice of life in the US today. The tension in suburban neighborhoods where homeowners associations, HOAs and self-appointed enforcers often spark unnecessary conflict. In the tale Ethan Brooks of Pine Hollow faces Sarah, a character embodying the modern American Karen, someone who imposes authority, ignores rules, and stirs trouble to feed their ego. From Sarah digging up Ethan's garden and claiming HOA presidency, to the ironic twist of her basement flooding, the story highlights issues like power trips, poor communication, and a lack of community responsibility that persist in American society today, especially in tightly managed HOA areas. The takeaway isn't just don't mess with others or you'll hurt yourself. It's deeper. In a diverse society like the US, respecting personal boundaries and leaning on community are key to resolving conflict. Ethan didn't confront Sarah with fists but with cameras, the law calling officers Perez and Lynn, and support from neighbors like Nora to protect his garden. Sarah, meanwhile, failed because she acted alone, defied reason, and didn't realize wrecking Ethan herbicide, digging up Buddy only backfired. Flooded basement, arrests. The practical advice if you meet a Sarah in life at your neighborhood, workplace, or grocery store: stay calm, gather evidence, and rally support from those around you instead of diving into a shouting match. Life in America today, with platforms like Reddit and local communities, shows collective strength can turn adversity, a trashed garden, into connection. Pine Hollow's planting day. Learn from Ethan. Patience, smarts, and faith in community. That's how to survive and win real-life drama. If you enjoyed the story of how my garden stood up to Sarah, and triumphed thanks to the Pine Hollow community, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more real-life drama. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video, where I'll share more wild tales from American suburban life.